Good afternoon. Welcome everyone to the committee meetings of July 24th of Bellingham City Council. Earlier today, the Planning Committee met at 9:45 this morning. Right now, our first afternoon committee meeting is Public Works, Public Safety, and Terry Borneman chairs that committee.
Okay, thank you, Michael. The first item before the City Council, before the committee, is a presentation on Bellingham's Community Paramedic Program. Joining me on the committee is Gene Knutson and Roxanne Murphy. Chief, take it away.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Council. Bill Newbold with the Fire Department. If I could, I'd just steal about 30 seconds here before we get on with the Community Paramedic Program presentation. I'd like to introduce Mannix McDonald. And as I say that, it seems strange for me to introduce Mannix McDonald because many of you know him, and with his tenure at the city, it would seem more appropriate for him to introduce me. However, let me introduce Division Chief Mannix McDonald, also serving as our Medical Services Officer. We recently had a process in the fire department to fill that position, and Mannix was one of the internal candidates, did extremely well. We had some very qualified candidates to consider, but we're very pleased to announce Mannix as Division Chief of EMS, and so
Great.
Chief Mannix McDonald, and I'll let him take it from here on EMS.
Congratulations, Mannix.
Thank you so much, Chief Mannix McDonald. Yeah, that's a weird title. As I look around the room, I see each of your faces, and I've worked with you in a different capacity. And in that capacity, I've really appreciated your support of the fire department and the firefighters. And so thank you so much for that. As the Division Chief of EMS, I get to evolve the EMS agenda for the future for the Bellingham Fire Department. So along with the other chiefs in the department, we get to work on EMS issues. And that's why we're here today. One of our goals with EMS is to be relevant in our community and to the citizens of Bellingham and then outside in our greater community. I'll give you a little background on the community paramedic, not to steal Captain Brubaker's thunder here, but previous to the EMS Division Chief, I was one of the EMS captains, one of 4 EMS captains that were responsible for the ongoing shifts. Mine was D shift. And what we noticed about 10 years ago, 8 to 10 years ago, were our crews would be coming to us and telling us, hey, we're going on this call, we're going to the same person, we're transporting these people repetitively. Is there something that we can do about it? So the 4 EMS captains concertedly, we worked together to try to figure out what we could do to get control of the repetitive calls that we appeared to be going on. We tried, not very successfully, but we recognized a need. And with that need was the introduction of the community paramedic idea. And again, I thank you for the support in that idea. Today, we get an opportunity to have Captain Jeff Brubaker come in and give you an update on the state of the community paramedic. So with that, I would like to introduce Captain Jeff Brubaker.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. As Chief McDonald noted, I'm Jeff Brubaker. I'm the community paramedic. Just a brief history, a little bit more detail on what Chief McDonald said. Our program was established in 2014 with the goal of reducing emergency medical service calls. The focus being on connecting those high utilizers to more appropriate non-emergent services. The benefits that we saw at the department were twofold. One, these citizens are connected to a more appropriate medical and social service need that better suits them, and it improves their patient care and outcome. The emergency department and emergency medical services is oftentimes not the appropriate venue for a lot of these calls. And two, the second benefit is capacity is created at the fire department for responding to more true emergencies. Since 2014, we've changed our service model quite a bit, as community paramedicine was pretty young at that time. We've partnered with the Whatcom Alliance for Healthcare Advancement to provide 2 intensive case managers. They're both here, Laura Woods and Andrea Day. Raise your hands. They do great work. So we coordinate by letting them take care of a lot of the social needs and some of the medical needs of the clients, and I focus specifically on their medical needs. More recently, in the last 6 months, we've moved more towards a GRACE type of model. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. So, first, who are these high utilizers? Typically, they fall into 6 categories. They're listed here in the order of the most prevalent to the least. And as you can see, if you're any good at math, these percentages add up to more than 100. And that is because most of our clients fall into more than one category. In fact, 86% have a co-occurring issue that leads to their EMS use. Some of them fall into all of these categories. So this all adds up to about 203%. But aging and disabled being our biggest hitter, and homelessness being our least. So for a client to be enrolled in our program, they have to have generated 6 or more EMS calls within the last 1 year. And so far, we have served 316 clients. So how effective are we? So let's break down our high utilizer population. As you can see, our top 2 high utilizers in 2016 generated 73 EMS calls. Our top 30 generated 428 EMS calls. And our top 200, 1,312 EMS calls, or 11% of our 2016 EMS call volume. In 2015 and 2016, high utilizers, after they were enrolled, were 20 to 40% less likely to use EMS. And that 1,312 calls does sound significant, and it is. It is down from our top 200 utilizers in 2014, generating 1,600 calls, or 15% of our overall EMS call volume. So we are making an impact on these folks. So we focus on about the top 50 of these, just because there's one community paramedic and we can't get to 200. That's just a lot of clients. So in 2017, we've moved more towards a GRACE type of model, and again, I'll talk about that in a second. And for those clients that we've enrolled so far this year, they're 50% less likely to use EMS. So how do we do it? So, and Dan, I know this is a baby of yours. GRACE, we use what's going to be a more formal program in about a year, but we kind of have a pared down version of it. And GRACE is an acronym that stands for Ground Level Response and Coordinated Engagement. But basically what that means is it is a coordinated approach to high utilizers across many organizations. Because as we know, there's a lot of duplication of effort and service, and we try to reduce that by coordinating with all of these organizations that you see listed. And this greatly improves efficiency and patient care and outcomes. So that is going to, GRACE as a larger countywide organization will be implemented in about 6 months to a year. Yes, sir.
I'm not familiar with the CPIT, the Crisis Prevention Intervention Team.
So crisis prevention, that is run by Compass Health, a local, well, it's not a local company, it's a pretty big company, but there's a local branch of it, and they have an embedded CPIT crisis worker with the police department. And that is who we work with as our front person for CPIT. So there are other ways that we are looking to reduce EMS call volume. Make the Right Call is a program that we implemented in 2016. So it is a training program for skilled nursing, assisted living, and secure memory care facilities to better utilize private ambulance companies, there are 2 locally, to transport non-emergent patients. And it makes sense because these facilities house such a high concentration of medically fragile patients. So we've partnered with these private ambulance companies to deliver this training to these facilities. So the good news for us is, that, again, it increases our ability to respond to higher acuity medical calls. It also benefits the private ambulance companies as this generates more business for them. So as you can see, in 2016, calls to all these three facility types was 1,200 calls, or 10% of our overall EMS call volume. So in 2017, if everything goes like it has so far this year, that is projected to be down to about 850, or only 7% of our overall EMS call volume. So what does the future of community paramedicine hold? There is a potential for additional community paramedics through the EMS levy and a regional Medicaid grant. With more community paramedics, opportunities are created for serving more clients by getting further into that top 200 high utilizer population. We could further expand the scope of our practice for medical management in the field, which would greatly improve patient care and outcomes. We can explore single resource response to low acuity medical and fire calls. And last but certainly not least will be the implementation of GRACE countywide. Community paramedicine is an ever-changing and evolving discipline, and the City of Bellingham is on the forefront of that movement. We strive to utilize proven, data-driven practices to provide outstanding service and at the same time reduce our EMS call volume. Our overall goal is to improve patient care and outcomes. Thank you. If you have any questions, please.
Committee? Questions? Yeah. Michael?
Yes, Captain, just one more kind of small question. Single resource response. I'm not familiar with what that means.
So our calls are broken down through dispatch from the least severe with Omega, and that could be, an example would be a sunburn. So right now, the lowest level of EMS response they would get is a BLS crew, which is 3 individuals. So for calls like that, we could explore sending a single resource, a community paramedic who's on duty at the time. Low acuity fire calls would be another one. So, really low risk fire calls. And that would again free up our crews to respond to more or higher acuity calls.
With you said with the GRACE program, it's going to go countywide later this year. Is that contingent on the EMS levy money moving forward to hire?
Nope.
No?
That's separate. So that
Okay,
is,
so tell me about that then.
So GRACE is, and Dan is the expert on this, and he might be the better one to answer your question. So what we have done is kind of stolen Dan's kind of bigger vision, not Dan in particular, but
Right.
it's a whole group of people who've created this sort of hub concept with each agency being a spoke and the hub being kind of a clearinghouse for the needs of particular clients. So we've just kind of copied that into a tiny microcosm with those agencies that I listed earlier. And it's working really well based on the data that I've been able to mine. So it's going to be countywide and much larger than it is now.
Great.
And right now it's not even technically GRACE. I just sort of copied his idea.
Okay.
You're welcome, Dan.
Okay. Dan, you had a...
I do. On your, I think it's your third slide, you've got a response to patient correlation. I'm just wondering if
This one?
it's the pyramid one. That one. So could the number be higher than what you have here in terms of patients that are that you're responding to? I noticed your footnote at the bottom. I'm just trying to.
Could the number be higher? I don't understand what you mean. The number of calls that they generate, or?
The number of patients that are being seen via the community paramedic program.
With more community paramedics, I would say yes. But with one individual, myself, I would say 40 is a stretch. 50 is a lot. So 30 to 40 is probably a little bit more ideal. It's just it's just time and resources, basically.
Can I follow up?
Yes.
You had mentioned a funding source I believe it was a Medicaid,
Yes.
like a regional Medicaid funding source. Could you
So-
just elaborate on that?
Yeah, so there is a 5-county coalition, and that is Snohomish, Skagit, Whatcom Island, and San Juan counties have gotten together as a regional coalition to put a grant into the state for Medicaid dollars that funds more community paramedics, and that is in the works. So the state could say, no, none. They could say, yeah, some of that, or they could say, yes, we will fund this entire ask. And the ask would be 3 additional community paramedics for Whatcom County. The max. The minimum, of course, is 0.
Pinky?
I don't expect you to know this off the top of your head, but I am curious how much money we're saving by doing this program versus having to go through our traditional routes.
Boy, that's a good question. I'm going to
So-
defer that
and
to...
and again, we can wait for that answer, but I would be curious to know.
I'll give you one perspective on it. When you look at this numbers up there, for example, that the third bar that he has, the 200 high utilizers, 1,312 calls. Typically, we try to keep a unit at around 2,600, 3,000 calls a year. And so when you look at the number of calls that are being utilized by those 200 individuals, that's about half a unit if you wanted to look at it in that perspective. And when I say unit, half of a medic unit as far as the call volume they go on a particular year. So it's very difficult to measure in terms of dollars. It's more measured in terms of capacity. We know that a paramedic unit, easy numbers to talk about, is a $2 million per unit as far as personnel costs, equipment, et cetera, to operate annually. And so the more capacity that we can build with our current paramedic units to appropriately serve those high acuity calls, the better off we are. And so that just builds a little capacity right now in the system.
So if you were to add that 1,312 calls to the Make the Right Call 1,200 calls, you are at an entire response unit. So if you can, I mean, I don't know how you'd break that down to dollars, though.
April, and then
So Pinky and I ran into you on the street going down to the mission to give somebody, I think, a nebulizer, which is a great example where you're not only saving us from having another true emergency call, but you're also saving, in some ways, we're impacting the hospital and their capacity as well.
Yes.
So for staff, I'm really interested in, as far as I know, the hospital doesn't contribute to our community paramedic program, but I think we're seeing where we're having, we thought we'd have an indirect effect, but we're having a very direct effect on them. So for staff, I'd be very interested in learning more of how we're going to work with the hospital in order to have them help us realize the positive impacts that they're having so that we can continue to partner and make this program more robust.
Yeah, so it's an interesting question that you ask, so, or that you state. So basically, we track not only EMS calls, but EMS transports. So after someone is enrolled, they have that, in the beginning, 20% and now 50% less likelihood to call. So they're also twice as likely to not be transported to the ER. So the ER is benefiting from this just as a side effect, basically.
Roxanne?
I'm just really proud that our city participates in this way and we so support this because it's helping in such a unique way. And I was really happy to hear about the regional understanding of it too, because I really hope this will spread to other jurisdictions as we're all trying to work on these issues in a cohesive way. So thank you.
When we started in 2014, I think there were about 180 programs like this nationwide, and it has just taken off since then. It's most places are at least exploring this as a possibility now.
I'm just really glad to see the results that are happening with this. When we first decided we were going to support this and push this, and then when we brought it up with the EMS levy that we wanted this to go county-wide, we were still guessing that we were going to have the impact that we're seeing. And I just want to thank you for the great job, because we are seeing those results, and we will be able to, I think, delay some of the putting on new units and cost effectiveness and just being much better service with it.
I agree with you.
Yeah, so I really want to thank you for your presentation and for the great job with this program. We knew it would be a valuable program, but now we know it is a valuable program.
Thanks for having me. I
Yes.
appreciate it.
Mayor?
Oh,
Very nice presentation.
Yeah.
okay.
I'm glad you all supported that too, because very seldom in your career as an elected official, you actually get to do something and within a very short period of time see it work. The question I had, Jeff, and I never asked you before, is if we get to expand the community paramedic that's included in the levy. Might be coming up. Could we get 24 hours? Could we get 24-hour service then instead of just?
It's a great question. So it's a good question that you ask. I don't know about that. Not a lot of places are doing 24-hour. Even the bigger places like Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue, who has at any one given time 5 community paramedics on the road, they're only doing days. And I think it depends on how you model so they also respond as a single resource, and it kind of depends on how you want to model that. I don't know that there's going to be, just off the top of my head, if there's going to be enough work at night to keep them busy. Maybe. I don't know. That's an interesting thought, though. Possibly.
Well, I was thinking that the hockey role is maybe somebody who at least be pager available. Or incidences.
Yes, we
Aren't
do.
always during the daytime. Actively, but at least.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
You have to answer that now.
That guy to your sitting directly to your left might be. I forget his name. Thanks.
Yep.
I appreciate
Thank you for the presentation.
And congratulations, Chief.
Yep. Okay. Our next item up is a residential solid waste disposal contract. Ted, I'll let you take it away.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Borneman, Ted Carlson, Public Works Department, along with Eric Johnston, Public Works Department. The item before the council today has to do with residential solid waste disposal, and I will go through what the item is, a bit of the process, and then ultimately a staff recommendation. But before I do that, I wanted to turn it over to the City Attorney's Office. Amy Cram wanted to talk a little bit about process and moving forward today.
Amy Cram, City Attorney's Office. I just want to let you know that we are going to give you this presentation today, but we'd like you to hold your vote for tonight. We'll be having an executive session after the committee meetings related to a communication that we received on Friday regarding this matter. So we wanted you to be fully informed before voting this evening.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Amy. So it's been about a year since the City Council has had any real discussions about the RFP process related to solid waste, residential solid waste disposal. So I thought I would provide a little bit of time providing the background and bring you up to where we are today. So as a reminder, Sanitary Service provides residential curb-sorted solid waste collection for the city. And dating back to about the 1980s through a series of lawsuits and settlement agreements, that solid waste, that residential solid waste, has been taken to Republic, or also known as Recomp, out on Slater Road for disposal. That settlement agreement expired in April of 2016. So prior to the settlement agreement expiring, city staff hired a consultant to really evaluate what should we do moving forward. What do we do once the settlement agreement expires? We came to council in April of 2015 to talk about what some of the options were. The city's not required to contract for disposal, so that was one of the options. But we evaluated some of the advantages of contracting for disposal, and those included really ensuring in the long term that we had a viable landfill, a landfill that always assured that we had capacity moving into the future for our residential solid waste, that there was stability in the landfill, there was financial stability, and that it was meeting all the regulatory requirements. So there are several advantages to moving forward with the contract. So we made that recommendation to council that we issue an RFP, a request for proposals, where we would receive proposals from landfill companies that would like to bid or propose on getting the city's residential solid waste. We had a series of meetings with the council. We drafted a draft RFP and got comments on the criteria used in that RFP that would outline how we would ultimately make the selection, what criteria would be weighted. Went through the Solid Waste Advisory Committee, which is an advisory committee set up in code to comment and provide policy direction to the Solid Waste Executive Committee and ultimately the County Council on some regional solid waste issues, as well as stakeholders, folks that ultimately were going to bid on this RFP, and got comment on what type of criteria we should use. Made some modifications and ultimately put an RFP out in May of 2016. Kept it out there for a while and got two proposals, one from Waste Management, RDS, and one from Republic. Originally, I had mentioned that a mandatory requirement of the proposal was that it came from someone that had a significant ownership interest in the landfill. The city was interested in contracting with the landfill. And on first glance, we felt that the proposal from RDS was from RDS, not from Waste Management. RDS is a transfer facility. They have a relationship with Waste Management. But staff's initial review of the proposal determined that that particular proposal was non-responsive, that it didn't come from a landfill, so it didn't meet the basic minimum requirements of the RFP. But after further discussion with RDS and working with RDS and Waste Management, staff reconsidered our position on that, got some additional information from Waste Management, and did make the determination that it was in fact a co-response from RDS and Waste Management. So with that, we had two viable responsive proposals for our residential solid waste disposal. And we were doing this whole process under state law, RCW, that lays out what the process is when you look to contract for this type of service, also in compliance with the city's own purchasing and bidding requirements. So we had a lot of guidance in the process moving forward. And so we ranked the two proposals. And then as laid out in the process, we had an interview process. So we had the written proposal. We then scheduled a presentation from the applicants or the respondents for them to provide additional information. At the end of that, we took the written information, the information that we received throughout the presentation process, and considered all that information, and staff made a recommendation. And at the end of it, as is laid out in the staff memo in your packet, and we attempted in the staff memo to be somewhat detailed, maybe more detailed than we normally are in a staff memo, but we wanted to provide a bit of the history, but also the key criteria that were used to determine our recommendation. And really came down to three factors. One was the environmental benefit of the transportation, getting the solid waste from the transfer facility ultimately to one of the two landfills. So Waste Management's landfill in Oregon, Republic's landfill in Washington. They're very near to each other, but how does the waste ultimately get down there? That was one of the considerations. Another one, I mentioned we were contracting with a landfill. We certainly wanted to better understand the operations of the landfill itself. So energy production at the landfill, what are the environmental benefits of the operations at the landfill? And then third is price. Price is a component of it. It wasn't the overwhelming component. We had those discussions throughout the RFP process, but it was something that we were going to consider. So staff's recommendation to council moving forward based on all that information is that we would move forward and negotiate a contract with Republic. We believe that they were superior in transportation. Ultimately, it was really a comparison between transportation by rail versus transportation by truck, at least from here in Bellingham to Seattle. Waste Management goes by truck from Bellingham to Seattle, where it's then put on rail. Republic has a rail facility at their transfer station here, so it's by rail the entire distance. So we gave the edge to Republic in that regard. We looked at power production at the landfills themselves. Republic has a greater capacity for landfill generation or for power generation at their landfill. That was information that was provided to us throughout the process. And they're working on a project right now to take the landfill gas, further refine it, put it back into the pipeline as pipeline grade natural gas that could be utilized in many different ways. That was presented to us in the oral presentation. So we gave an edge to Republic in that arena. And then as it comes down to price, very, very close. The tonnage price, as you can see in the staff memo, was less than $1 separation. So very, very close in terms of the unit price or the price per ton. But we did believe there was one distinguishing factor in the price, and that had to do with the price escalation moving forward. Staff would be recommending a very long-term contract, a 20-year contract. So when you start talking about annual escalation, compounding of interest, it can be significant moving forward depending on what the inflation is. The Republic proposal tied price escalation to an index, to a price inflator, which many of our contracts are written that way. Waste Management had a similar proposal, Waste Management RDS, but it also had some language in there that regardless of the inflator, they would get a minimum of a 2% increase each year, annually. So if inflation was low, the index was lower than that, they would still get a 2% price increase annually, whereas didn't matter what the index was for Republic. If it was 0, which it has been in years previous, there would be no increase. So we felt that that was substantial moving forward. So when we evaluated those three key criteria, and there's much more analysis that was done, it is a complex analysis. There are a lot of issues to consider. Our recommendation is that we would move forward and negotiate a contract with Republic. The process as laid out in RCW would require us then to come back to the City Council, and for us to move forward with negotiation would take a vote of the Council. And that was the issue that Amy touched on, that we're going to ask for you to hold that vote until this evening if you're prepared to do it then. But if we do get direction to negotiate a contract, then we would move forward and do that. And then there would be another piece of the process, which would be we would come back to City Council with a contract that would have been negotiated between the city and the company. We would hold a public hearing. People could comment on the contract itself, and then we would ask Council to authorize the mayor to enter into a contract. So that's the process moving forward. I kept it a little bit brief. I was already a little bit of information. There's much more in the staff memo, and Eric and I are happy to answer questions about the process moving forward, reasons for our decision, or whatever else council may wish to ask. So with that, I'd turn it back over to council for questions.
Committee, questions? Okay, Pinky? No, I know, but there wasn't any questions.
Okay. Quick question. I'm just reading over the RFP here, and I was just, if you could explain for me. One, so Republic already has an opportunity for methane capture, so that's already in existence, and the other one is a proposed. Is that the difference between the two in regards to the methane capture?
Both landfills have a process to capture landfill gas, extensive system in place. Both landfills do. Both landfills currently produce energy using that methane. They have different capacities to do that. What was presented to us during the oral presentation is a project that is underway right now, has been approved by Republic to move forward and further refine the landfill gas to put it into where it could be put into a pipeline grade gas to be used as natural gas. That was a project that is not yet complete, but has funding and is moving forward. So we did consider that as part of our analysis, that was a project, as this is a 20-year project or 20-year contract. We're looking at what are some of the issues that may not be fully complete but underway.
Okay, thank you.
I wanted to add to that just very briefly, one of the things that was important to differentiate between the two landfills, which are both excellent landfills that we would point out, is that the information in the responses from the respondents, it was clear that Republic's capacity to produce methane gas or produce power from their facility has a greater capacity at the Republic landfill than what was presented to us by Waste Management.
Thanks. I was just, because it said generate up to 37 megawatts on the other one, so I was trying to, like, is it in existence, but it's there, it's just opportunity for more capacity?
Correct. One of the other differentiators the Republic was proposing was not only power generation, but return of actual methane or natural gas to the natural gas line pipeline itself, which is another differentiator between the two landfills. Whereas both produce power, one has the potential to put that methane back into the system.
Okay, April?
Thank you. My question is similar. So I saw those difference in numbers and was like, wow, one really has a lot of capacity, and then the other one, it's amazing that they both, the tonnage per year is both 2 million, about 2 million tons, but one's producing so much more. When I just went on first glance at the websites for both of those landfills, it specifically says on the Republic website that they actually produce only 10 megawatts, and that the other landfill produces 12.6. So the capacity, yeah, it has a lot of capacity, but what they're actually producing is less than what Waste Management is producing. So just at first glance, I thought that was interesting, and it made me want to dig in a little bit more because especially that one of your main three reasons is that the energy that the landfill was able to produce is so important. The difference, though, is that there's no wind on site at the, and I know this wasn't in here, but I was just very interested at that point, who's producing a lot of energy at which landfill. And at the Republic landfill, there's no wind on site, is my understanding from their website, but there's rented wind on site at the other one that's producing a capacity of 150 megawatts at the Waste Management one. So I'm interested in why that wasn't calculated. It sounds like at your very first glance, the written, my understanding is here, that both companies came out about the same, but then it was in those interviews that things started flushing out differently. And I'm wondering, did Waste Management just not let you know about these things that they're doing? As far as what's coming up, the Waste Management one is planning on bringing glass, plasma arc gasification, anaerobic digestion, recycling plastic into crude oil, although that's interesting. So why were those things not calculated in this?
I think you touched on a part of it. When staff is reviewing any RFPs, and we do obviously dozens of these a year on various services and different contracts, we evaluate based on the information that's provided to us. So provided to us either through written proposal or through a presentation. In the proposal that we got from Republic, for instance, there was, I believe, 3 pages on power production at their landfill, because that was a key component. We were pretty clear, actually very clear from the very beginning, that we were contracting with a landfill. And so Republic placed a certain importance on that in providing their information, including providing far more detail on what happens at the landfill itself. I think there was 1 paragraph in the initial proposal from Waste Management RDS on what happens at Columbia Ridge. And so much of it has to do with the information that we provided and the strategy from the respondents on what was important and what they thought we should consider in our decision.
Yes. Michael, first.
Okay, I'll wait.
Well, no, Michael.
Okay, well, I have
one
a question which is related but a little bit different. This really has to do with the waste stream that's being received and then sent to landfills. So the sorting is not done by either of these companies. It's done by SSC at the front end. And there's some statistics in the back about the increase in the use of composting and the increase in the use of the Food Plus program. So we are actually working hard to alter the waste stream that we're giving to these landfill people. In a certain sense, I hope their methane production goes down if we do more front-end removal of organics. But my question is, do we have any idea how much further growth potential there is on the front end before it goes to the landfill at the SSC portion, which is not under this contract, but before this contract?
We do. I'll turn it over to Eric. He has some additional detail as outlined really in the very recently adopted county solid waste plan in terms of where the opportunities were. But you hit on it really in many ways. It's the organics on the front end. It's increasing Food Plus. And Eric can provide perhaps some additional detail on exactly what capacity might be there in terms of increasing that program.
So the county recently adopted a solid waste plan for the entire county that will be in place for several years that outlines priorities for the county, and the city is a part of that solid waste plan. And it identifies a couple of areas for increasing diversion efforts within the county. One of the large areas is in construction debris, trying to reduce the amount of construction debris that's sent to the landfill, and that involves both on-site sorting by the customers as well as some post-sorting by the transfer facilities. And that has a high degree of potential. Along with that is industrial users and reducing recyclables from getting into the waste stream at the source. On the residential waste stream, the biggest untapped resource, if you will, it has the biggest return in the short term is on organics. So with it across the county, about 30 to 35% of the commodity recycling, that's waste, papers, and plastics, is sorted at the curb by the customer and collected by the hauling companies. There's a pretty large untapped resource for diversion by organics, and that might be food waste or yard debris or other types of organic material that could be composted. We're seeing pretty strong growth for that through the SSC Food Plus program. That's a voluntary program that's not mandated or required. The county comp plan identifies that through education and customer awareness that those efforts would increase over time, both for commodity recycling and organics. If we compare the city of Bellingham to the city of Seattle or the city of Portland, the city of Seattle is about 75% diversion for residential waste. And a large component of that in recent years has been their adoption of mandatory and obligatory organic separation by customers in the waste stream. Portland is in a very similar situation. They're upwards of 70% on the recycling or the diversion for residential waste streams. Again, a very large portion of that is placed into the organics. So is there a potential for increased diversion at the residential customer with the curb sort? I think that is consistent with the county's comp plan, but that target is really going to be on the organics collection at the curb by the customer.
So I'm going back to the three main things that you all decided, or it sounded like you made your decision ultimately on. The other one, beyond what is the capacity at the landfill as far as energy production, is that environmental transportation component. And I'm interested in the science behind being able to figure out that rail from Bellingham to Seattle is better than like high-end or newer diesel truck going to Seattle. And I know sometimes we base that on some science, but is that science specific to the number of rail cars, the way that transportation is going? So for instance, I have a Prius. I love my Prius. I get 50 miles to the gallon. My friend lives up on South Hill, got rid of his Prius because he only gets 30 miles to the gallon, but we're driving different paths. So how comfortable do you feel that rail going from Bellingham to Seattle is that much less of a carbon footprint?
Sometimes that question can be answered by different ways by different people. Okay. And I think the respondents both had answers that were unique to their proposal. So both respondents said that their method of transportation was more environmentally friendly or had lower carbon footprint than the competitors. A lot of the information that we used to base our decision on was based on science produced by the federal government and by research agencies who are focused on transportation methods, where it's generally accepted in multiple studies that rail, in large part, is more efficient than freight vehicles on a per ton type of basis in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. To get down to a very specific this mile, this ton of gas, there are different ways to come up with a number. But in general, broad terms, it's widely accepted that trains are more efficient at hauling freight than freight trucks over the road.
I'm just interested in the redundancy piece because I know that was weighted in here, so that if we're relying on rail to go from Bellingham to Seattle, if something were to happen in between there, I know the redundancy for Waste Management is that they have a Wenatchee site as well as another. Where are we at with the redundancy? How are they able to answer that question with Republic?
So the redundancy question from a transportation method of getting it from Ferndale to a landfill, one question could ask, well, what happens if a bridge goes out on the I-5 corridor? So if you're hauling by truck and the bridge goes out, you have no way getting further south. If you're hauling by train and the train tracks wash out, how do they get around it? The redundancy is provided by a truck. In terms of the landfill destinations, both respondents indicated that there are multiple landfills that they could take their waste to. Waste Management proposal said that they had alternatives both the Wenatchee landfill and for the Columbia Ridge landfill, with Columbia Ridge being the primary, Wenatchee being as a backup. Republic in their oral presentation made clear that they had multiple landfills throughout their system as well.
That don't rely on the I-5 corridor?
Correct.
Okay.
I guess the next step is we have an executive session on this, and then we will discuss the contract tonight in the regular session, and maybe make our decision then.
That's correct.
Is that
Yep.
correct? Okay. Well, moving on then. Our next item is, let me see here, is a presentation on the Post Point Treatment Plant Biosolids Project update.
Thank you. Ted Carlson, again, Public Works, and going to be joined by Rob Johnson, who is the city's plant superintendent. So Rob oversees both the water treatment plant and the wastewater treatment plant. And this presentation is in part with keeping council informed on our process and looking at how we handle solids down at Post Point. We've had a couple presentations to council. We've had one community meeting. We'll be having another community meeting, and just want to continue the discussion with council and let you know where we're at. So with that, I'll turn it over to Rob Johnson.
Hi, Robert Johnson, City of Bellingham Plant Superintendent. I want to update you on the biosolids at Post Point resource recovery process that we've gone through, and where we're at in the stages of the planning process. First thing I wanted to do is address or readdress why we're engaging in this planning process and what the drivers were for the project. One of the things that we took on is that our incinerators are more than 40 years old. They're way past their design life, and that was one of the main drivers for the project and why we actually got into this process. The incinerators and their ancillary equipment are very expensive to maintain, operate, and repair. That helped us make the decision. There's no heat recovery or energy recovery or resource recovery. It's all a disposal process. So that helped drive one of the project dynamics in terms of where we wanted to go, as opposed to just continuing to incinerate. We burn the solids, and we utilize natural gas to thermally reduce those solids down into ash, effectively burning natural gas and our solids. One of the things that hit us more recently is the increased stringency on the regulatory side of things. Sewage sludge incinerators were accepted as into a more rigorous regulatory process, and that's going to continue going forward. Northwest Clean Air inspects us quite frequently, and they're very concerned about our ability to meet those regulatory requirements in the future. So there's a lot of reasons why we want to look past incineration and move into biosolids. And I just wanted to remind people of our council of the drivers of taking on this project to begin with. There's two streams at Post Point, one being the liquid stream. This biosolids resource recovery process will not be looking at the liquid streams. We feel like we have a pretty robust system there. We're only looking at the solid stream. Currently, you see on the graphic in the lower left-hand corner that we're taking ash and putting it in landfill, and then we're losing heat through the incineration process. So what we want to do is the proposed solid stream treatment process. We want to take a look at power generation, gas recovery, potential for heat recovery, and then we want to do something to reuse those biosolids. There's nutrients available, and we want to capture that. One of the first things we did was take a step back, and there were prior studies in the biosolids process. We wanted to take a step back and take a look at all the high-level alternatives available to treat biosolids and capture resources off biosolids. So we did a high-level screening process of the world of alternatives. And that was based on a pass-fail criteria. We came up with some pretty stringent evaluation criteria, things along the lines of, is it technically sound, is it proven? And there's a whole list of categories of pass-fail criteria. And then what we did with that is we evaluated that down into some subcategories, and then we will run that through the triple bottom line plus evaluation technique, which I think we've presented in the past and you guys are familiar with. This slide just covers, it's very busy, how we developed the triple bottom line plus criteria. We tied that criteria, meaning the environmental, social, financial, and technical aspects, back into the City Council legacy statements and strategic commitments, because we wanted to capture the public and the council's ideas inside of that triple bottom line process. And here's a quick overview of the narrowed down. We extrapolated the legacy statements and strategic commitments down into environmental, social, financial, and technical. So this is an overview of those slides, and we have presented it on this in the past. So what are the world of ideas that we broke down and ran through the triple bottom line process? So I wanted to go through those real quick and inform you of what we actually ran through the triple bottom line plus process, and we can ask questions, and I can give you more detail in how we or what the actual processes are. So alternative number one is a Class B digestion with land application of the biosolids. The digestion process of Class B would be done on the Post Point site, and one of the criteria that we looked at is where we will engage in the biosolids process. Where will that take place? How are we going to manage that from our capability of available real estate? The beneficial end use, Class B does have some restrictions. Sometimes there's permits required for land application. However, it is seen as a beneficial reuse. So that was alternative one. Alternative two is on-site digestion at the Post Point facility with a thermal drying process, basically a heated dryer, and then we get a very dry product out of that. That ends up with a Class A product at the end of the process. And there's several alternatives to utilize that Class A dried product, such as like a soil amendment. We could bag it and sell it potentially. So there's a lot of availability to reuse that. The alternative number three was on-site Class A digestion, which effectively is a more intensive treatment process on the front end. Then we take that digested product, we take it off-site, and we blend it and produce a soil product out of it. So there's an on-site Post Point digestion component and an off-site soil blending facility that processes that product into a commodity that we could retail or utilize in the local community. And when I say off-site, I mean locally off-site. We just don't have the space at Post Point to do that complete process, that soil blending process. Alternative number four is very similar to alternative number three. However, everything is done off-site. So the digestion is done off-site and the soil blending is done off-site, meaning off-site local. That would be done through a piping process where we actually pipe the solids we evaluated up to 8 miles for piping it out, and then a 4-mile return to get the centrate or the return water that you actually, once you dry the product, back to the Post Point facility. So alternative number four is very similar to number three. It just preserves the Post Point site for some potential or theoretical use in the future. So here's how the process shook out in terms of the triple bottom line evaluation criteria. And on the left side of the graph, you'll see the ideal. So if there was a process that was 100% ideal on every aspect of the evaluation criteria, it would stack up to the highest. So a higher potential on the graph means it was closer to the ideal process. What we found is that alternative number three was the most ideal, and some of the things that came out of that process was the environmental impact had the highest potential. So a higher graphical display means it was closer to ideal according to the evaluation process. So That, if you remember back to the previous slide, alternative number 3 was on-site Class A digestion with off-site soil blending. So that's how it shook out in terms of the triple bottom line plus results.
Can I ask a quick question, Rob?
Sure.
Back to the other graph.
This one?
Yeah. So how does option number 4 have a higher environmental when it's transporting more product and a lower, and on-site option 1 has a lower environmental?
So option number 4 has a higher environmental because it's piped. So we pipe it. So the pumping costs, so the transportation, we're not really trucking, we're pumping. Alternative number 1 has a high trucking because it's a Class B product. It's hard to land apply a Class B product in Western Washington. You actually have to truck it over to Eastern Washington and land apply it over there. There is beneficial reuse. However, we're trucking Class B product east of the mountains. So that's where you get the environmental
That's very clear
switch.
to me. Yeah.
So.
Thank you.
Can I just add one more thing on that? So on these range of 4 options, they are very general and broad categories for these options. So we still have a long ways to go when it comes to picking what we're going to be doing here, but these 4 categories are within the world of 50 different ways to do digestion. There are commonalities between all of them, and they all have the ability to recapture energy and do great things with the resource recovery, but they're specific enough that we can compare the range of options within that. So when we say alternative 3, that's the start of looking at what we might actually do. And it's coming out as probably the category that best meets all of our needs together. So I don't want us to think at this point in the game that we've decided this is what we're doing. We're narrowing into the range of options that suggest something at Post Point with an offsite for the recovery.
I'd like to offer kind of a comment in the other direction. We've already kind of narrowed the realm of how we could do our solids handling down to biosolids. So there's an even broader universe, and this is already one of the more environmental choices within that broad range. Now we're looking for the even better choice within that narrow range.
Absolutely, and that's what we first did on the pass-fail criteria that Rob described, is looked at every way to possibly deal with the solid side of treatment. Incineration, gasification, pyrolysis, you name it. We looked at all those range of options, and we said, yep, consistent with our values, that digestion is the preferred way to go. So again, that narrowing of options from here down to here, we're going to get even closer as we go through the process.
Good. So as part of the process, the project team went out, and we wanted to make sure that the ability to take a biosolid and utilize it in the local community and capture gas and heat recovery, we want to make sure that it was viable and that other people were doing it. So we went on a tour. We looked at the city of Sumner, and then we also looked at the city of Tacoma. They both are doing alternatives that we evaluated. They were both doing alternatives that were ranked pretty high in the evaluation process. And they were both utilizing their product in the local community, which we thought, based on public feedback, that was something that the public wanted to do. So the city of Sumner does digestion, and they do a Class A product out of a dryer, and then they give it away in the local community. People can come pick it up and use it as a soil amendment. They could utilize it on their garden. There's a lot of ways to utilize that end product. The city of Tacoma has a very robust program for soil distribution, and they had a very interesting program, a very aggressive community outreach program. All of their drivers were master gardeners. They were very involved in their community. They participate in the Puyallup Fair. They produce these Jurassic Park-sized vegetables out of their Tagro product. So they have a very interesting program at the city of Tacoma, and they utilize all of their biosolids in the region through this Tagro soil product, topsoil product. So what we're embarking upon is available. Other people do it. It's something that is being done in Western Washington. So as part of this process, we decided to do a pretty robust public outreach program to involve the community. So on May 23rd, we had a community workshop where we reached out to the public and we gave them an overview of what we were attempting and gave them options to provide feedback. Two of the criteria that they provided a great deal of support for on the triple bottom line process were the environmental and the social impacts. So we tried to address those issues and that's where you've seen option 3 really came out ahead in terms of the environmental and social aspects. And overall, option 3 ranked high on the triple bottom line scale. Going forward, we're presenting this overview of what we're going to look at to council, and then we're also going to take this out to the public on July 31st and have another public meeting. We put out questionnaires to the public. We're sending out flyers. So like I said, we have a pretty robust public outreach component. We'll update the public on the status and overview the preliminary. This is just the preliminary triple bottom line plus where we're kind of starting to narrow this process down. The next steps, we're going to refine the concepts. So we're going to take option 3 and we're going to refine it down. There's a lot of things you can do with the gas produced off the digesters. Do you put it back in the pipeline? Do you use it for vehicle fuel? So there's a lot of alternatives to look at going forward, and the next stage of that process is to take option 3, the larger scope process, and narrow it down into those finer components. And then what we'll do with that is we'll run that through the triple bottom line process, those different components. You know, do you put it back on the pipeline? Do you make vehicle fuel out of it? How do you do the soil amendment? We're going to continue to engage the public, and then we'll also provide council with updates on where we're at, and when appropriate, ask for feedback from council.
Thank you.
That's it.
So committee, any questions or comments? Okay.
I got one after I.
Okay, but I do want to say we're 15 minutes over. We still got another item, and there's no action going to be taken on these. So if people can hold their questions to ask staff, I think the chair, Michael, might appreciate it that we get. So I just want to say that, you know. So
Well, I think this is a really appropriate time where the public gets to hear the questions.
I know. I'm just saying. So if it's okay with Michael, I'm asking the chair first. So
I think it's up to the council. Maybe we ask.
yeah, it's fine.
I think all this time has been the time my question would have taken. So I'm just interested, whenever you do the social benefit portion, do you measure in the production of living wage jobs potentially? Because if you're going to have a product at the end, you're going to need people to help make that product. Are you measuring that inside there, or is that not part of the measurement that you're looking at?
We're not, I don't think we're to that level of detail on that. Certainly, impacts to the local economy would be one thing we would consider in the long term as we get closer to the preferred option.
Thank you.
Okay, we have one more item before us.
The mayor just wanted to say I'm very happy that we're moving forward with this, because it used to just be for cow manure, and so I'm happy that the city gets to participate.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, we have one more item before us, and that's a proposal to remove 2 on-street parking stalls from West Champion Street.
Thank you. We will be brief. The city was approached by the owner of the restaurant in the city-owned space near the Mount Baker Theater, 100 North. They would like to create some outdoor dining space on Champion Street adjacent to the restaurant. To do that would require widening the sidewalk in that area. There's an existing curb bulb out for pedestrian crossing there, so there's an opportunity to extend the sidewalk out to the bulb out in terms of width from the building, create enough space to provide the outdoor dining, but it does require removing 2 street trees and the removal of 2 on-street parking spaces. So we've worked with the restaurant owner to evaluate it. They've hired an engineer and have a contractor in mind to do the work. We did take this to the Transportation Commission, who's responsible for providing input and recommendation to the City Council as it relates to transportation issues. the code requires the council to take action on removal of parking spaces on arterials, so that's why we're before the council today. Public Works and Parks have both weighed in on this, as well as Community Development, who's been working with the restaurant owner on the advantages of the outdoor space. It's our recommendation that council would vote to approve the removal of the parking spaces. The Transportation Commission also approved that 7-0. Chad Schulhauser, city engineer, is here to answer any questions you may have.
Roxanne?
Just last week, a community member asked me if there was anything we could do to create more outdoor dining and seating experiences. And so I will be happy to move that we remove the 2 on-street parking stalls from West Champion Street.
Okay. I've got a couple questions about it, though. One, did you consult with the other businesses like Mount Baker? Because when there's an event going on, that area, it's really hard to find parking spots. And I go to those events, I know how hard it is to find parking spots, so you're taking 2 away that are used real regular. And so
Yeah, that's a great consideration. The theater is in favor of this in an effort to try to make the restaurant more successful. They believe that this is going to really pay dividends for them. So the theater is in favor of it. We did not reach out to other proper owners or business owners within that area, but did have that discussion at the Transportation Commission. And I apologize, I failed to mention that they will be required to replace the street trees. There'll be an agreement to maintain the vegetation, and this is all being done at the restaurant owner's expense. So there's no city money in this, if you approve it.
that's part of the question, said at the owner's expense, but there is the loss of revenue in terms of parking for 2 spots. And I think, outdoor dining is a great thing, but I also feel we have to make sure everything's covered, and the city's not allowed to do public gifting. So will they pay for what revenue would have been generated from those 2 parking spots? Because otherwise, this is a gifting and the taking away from the parking reserves for the downtown that goes into that.
So there would not be any agreement or requirement to reimburse the city for lost parking revenue. So to that question, no, there's nothing that would say they would pay for that lost revenue to the parking fund. I would have to defer to Peter on the gifting and how that was not something that we considered in this request.
Yeah, Peter?
Yeah, Peter
It appears to me that would be a gifting of
Peter Rufato, City Attorney's Office. So usually when we think about gifting, we think about the expenditure of city funds. In this case, what you're saying is that we would be foregoing the receipt of parking revenue.
Right, that we would get
That usually
from
doesn't
it.
get us into that gifting issue. The other thing is, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe this is city property that we're talking about in terms of the restaurant facility itself. So it's actually arguably an improvement to the city's own infrastructure and facility.
It is city-owned building, yes.
And then one more, I'll get to you, Michael, but committee first. With this, if we do this proposal for a restaurant, again, I love the idea of outdoor dining, and it does help. If others in the downtown area request such a thing, because you're doing this here, I guess we can fall back on, well, this is city-owned property, and so we're doing it for ourselves, but does that present any problems with denial or considerations of other requests?
I think what the code would say is that we would consider all requests individually on their merit. I think there is that distinction on this particular request, that it is a city-owned building, that the city and the public have certainly an interest in seeing this restaurant be successful. And in our discussions with the restaurateur, we believe that this is a step in that direction and that the outdoor dining space makes sense in the downtown. It's something we've done before. I know in other areas of town where we've widened the sidewalk to allow for additional use of the sidewalk from a kind of economic development perspective. But I think to your question, if we are approached in the future, we would take all of those requests and run them through our process. It would be a little bit different in this particular case, because the city owned the adjacent property and the building. We facilitated the request because staff thought it was favorable. But we would take all the requests through, run them through the Transportation Commission, and if it involved parking, and certainly to council.
Okay. Michael?
Yeah, I guess I would just give some information to the committee. One is I did talk to an adjacent property owner who would be affected by this, and that property owner was very supportive, a private property owner, and to a representative of the Downtown Bellingham Partnership who was supportive of it. And it's the downtown that benefits from the parking revenue. And I would remind the committee that our parking system is not a big money maker. It costs a fair amount of money to police and oversee the parking system. It's not a big profit center. I don't think we're talking about a loss of a significant amount of revenue. And I think we can point to an example on the Arts District in front of the Mount Bakery and the Blacktop Cafe, where parking removal has been a big benefit. So I'm hoping this would be another example like that.
Just to that, it's not a big money maker, but when you figure the cost of what it costs for a parking spot, if you're putting it in a parking garage or whatever, then, 10, 20, I don't know. It's really expensive whenever we try to add parking. So I just want to throw that out there. But I just wanted to make sure we're covered on it, because there wasn't anything about those issues, and usually there's something about the other businesses and things. So we have a motion before the committee. All those in favor, answer aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, motion passes, and we'll recommend approval tonight.